Hey everybody, lots of changes. New outfit, new season, new temperatures, hence the outfit. And there won't just be one dog running around anymore. There's a few running around here. So anyhow, there's also a little bit of new pacing for some of my videos, and new experience of the next videos coming out are actually. This will be the first time that this clip series precedes the actual posting of the podcast. So if you like the clips coming up, make sure to stay tuned for the full podcast being released and check that out. Thanks to all my new subscribers. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, interact on the videos, and thanks for watching. I wanted to make a video for a little bit, and then another video came up recently which tied in with it, so I'll get into that. And I'm going to make another one on capitalism because I'm capitalizing on the capital of the subject of capitalism, as is the capitalist spirit. So I had this experience, I don't know, a couple years ago, I guess now. We were at a local farmer's market and milling around, and just a group of mixed people, and I don't know what happened. Someone said something political. I don't remember what it was, but there was a big guy, and I just mean tall, broad, not big in any negative way, just big guy, and he just went off and said some loud things about how, this is all the fault of the capitalists. This is all Koch brothers, etc., and let us know very loudly and very assertively his opinion on the capitalists and capitalism. And everybody, kind of was like, oh, okay. And one of the vendors just kind of said, well, we're just going to enjoy our freedoms while we have them, and mollified it and just moved on. So it wasn't a big, didn't turn into anything worse. And guy spoke his mind, cool. But I kept thinking about it, and I realized, I was like, I might not even disagree with this guy. I mean, on the surface, I disagree with him, sure. But he said the capitalists, and he said Koch brothers. That's what I remember from him. And it's true that there are people who are very wealthy who use their wealth to exercise influence that fosters things or promotes things more than they would otherwise be promoted. So people use their wealth to exercise influence to some degree, push actual change, and people might even say control. Whatever the level it is, I could potentially agree that people are misusing or are not playing in a way that promotes the best interest of everyone. Okay, fair enough. And that might even be true for most people there who found this guy's speech uncomfortable from the reaction of the crowd that you could tell. But, the ironic thing is that he's standing there, and pretty much it seems like we're in a conservative area, so pretty much everyone standing around the farmer's market would be like, well, we're literally being top-notch capitalists right now, participating in capitalism, running our own business, trying to make a profit. So you're not preaching to the choir here. And I see that side of it. So it's like, okay, well, we seem to be completely at odds there, but I'm not totally sure, reflecting on it, I'm not totally sure anybody was even at odds. Everyone might have agreed. There'd be probably plenty of people who were there who would say, well, yeah, we reject what they would call crony capitalism. So really, we might just have a disagreement of terms. He calls it capitalism. We might call it crony capitalism. We both don't like it. We don't actually disagree, it's just a disagreement on terms. And then we could have a debate on, well, maybe capitalism is the appropriate term. All capitalism is crony capitalism because the free market, which is what people call capitalism, has sort of always existed, which I think is true to some degree. And then the only new thing that capitalism as such, the area of capitalism, has introduced is this crazy big opportunity for the crony capitalists to do crony capitalist things. There's an argument for that. But again, you have to go into that argument to see, do we actually disagree, and how seriously do we disagree? So, it seems like an obvious point, but I think it turns into a really big thing, and part of what goes on in all of our disagreements is just sometimes we just disagree about terms. And terms are important, and why we use them are important, but you have to go that extra step and say, okay, but what do you mean by that, and how is that reflecting of your principles, and do our principles match up even though we're using different terms? Rather than just sort of reacting to, oh, he doesn't like capitalism, therefore I'm not on the same side as him because he's bad-mouthing capitalism and I love capitalism. Like, well, again, we just might not even disagree, even though we had this awkward exchange where it appears we do. So this ties in to the videos coming up where we're going to talk about understanding across political divides and talking about how to deal with that, how to deal with finding out whether we disagree and why, and then talking about it and having that freedom of speech and allowing the other side's freedom of speech, etc. So that all ties in, and it ties into what I saw recently through Gospel Simplicity, his channel. He did several announcements and posts about the most recent, or the first exhortation from Pope Leo. And when he first posted about it, I went through and looked at it briefly. I just skimmed it. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit. I watched his video just now. Finally got around to it. I had saved it. But I'm going to talk about it, but I'm not trying to portray this as advice, as a sufficient assessment, because I have not in detail read the post. I'm just talking about the superficial level of presentation, and I'm doing that because I want to talk about the superficial level of presentation. So I'm not trying to analyze, I'm not trying to have a definitive statement on like, this is what the Pope said and this is why it's a problem. I'm talking about appearances and how appearances can cause us problems, and we can stall out there. So anyhow, when I first skimmed the exhortation, I saw a lot of what I would identify as very left-wing, even radical left-wing economic jargon or empty talking points. And I'll recognize that a lot of left-wing radicals would claim those terms. At the same time, many left-wing moderates would claim those terms. That's a separate issue of like, okay, well, what do we actually mean? Why do the moderates and the radicals agree? What makes the ones radical, and what makes the ones moderate? We got to separate those. That's a whole separate thing, and an issue of like, well, are you guys really in agreement, or is there a broad swath of things that cannot be considered the same being hidden under blanket surface level terms? Again, problem with the terms and why terms are important and why we need to talk about them more deeply. So one thing I do want to say is that Austin, on Gospel Simplicity, did point out that Pope Leo recognized nuance, and he talked about how, okay, yes, here's some I'm just going to call left-wing, I don't mean that in any derogatory sense, left-wing economic points, but he also recognized that getting poor people working is the best way to reduce poverty. Cool. So it's not all just one-sided. And I don't know how much of those caveats are in there, because again, I didn't read it. So I'm again not presenting a detailed analysis or definitive statement. I want to make that clear, and I'm not trying to. So saying that, still the highlights I got for it were these just what feels like to me sort of vapid left-wing statements if they're taken in isolation. And so it's like, if you're just hearing these highlights, if you're just hearing these summations, these headlines, you might say, and like I'm having a reaction to it, I'm like, ooh, like, I don't, I substantially disagree with that, let's say. Maybe not just a little, I substantially disagree with that. Or I don't think that's the right way to push, or whatever it is. And I'm saying I'm having a negative reaction to it, and I'm already standoffish, but I'm also recognizing I haven't looked into it, and I don't actually know how much we disagree, or if we disagree at all, because these are just highlights, these are just headlines. So I think that's really important to recognize, and recognizing that we do it. We react to headlines and then assume that we're on the other side of the headlines, when it's like, these are just headlines, and you actually need to go deeper than the headlines. So I would say, and I'm just going to comment briefly on what I would say is my opposing opinion, as a point to make a further point. Again, not an assessment. I am not sufficiently informed because I haven't looked into it. But I would say what I heard from Gospel Simplicity and through him about the Pope, and then briefly looking at the Pope's exhortation, what I heard, I would say, well, the Pope talks about people needing jobs, but he also talks about what he calls pseudoscientific, I think that was a quote, studies about how capitalism, or I forget the term he used, how we lift people out of poverty with, let's say, right-wing policies. And there's a problem of terminology here that I think goes deeper than just disagreement on terms. Is the Pope in a position to be declaring economic statements as pseudoscientific? Is the Pope an economic scientist? I don't think so. I could be wrong. I also could be backing pseudoscientific claims because I am not an economic scientist. I don't actually know. So if I counter that, I don't actually know. He might be right in saying I'm making a pseudoscientific claim. But on first blush, to have the Pope come out and be like, pseudoscientific claims, that's like very modern political jargon that's getting dragged in. You also have the Pope commenting on economic issues and how government should act. And while I agree, I want to say this, everything I'm saying here, I don't view as in contradiction, or at least potentially not in contradiction to anything I heard Gospel Simplicity say, anything that I read from the Pope. The problem is they're just blanket statements. So it's like, okay, when we dig in, what do we actually disagree about? Again, this is my point. The Pope was like, well, we can't be just turning to worldly powers. We need to turn to the church's advice on charity. I agree with that. At the same time, it's also true that the Pope is not an economic scientist, to my best understanding. Both of those are true, and both of those have ramifications that we need to pay attention to. So then it's like, well, okay, if he's coming out and calling, the right-wing economic pseudoscientists, but then he also recognizes that getting people jobs is the best way to lift people out of poverty. There's a lot of the jargon that I heard that would just be right on the anti-capitalist side. At the same time, as far as I know, maybe I'm making a pseudoscientific claim, I really do not know, but to the best of my understanding, capitalism has been the thing that has lifted the most people out of poverty in the world's history. And by far, many, many times, many orders of magnitude better than anything else. So should you really be comfortable with being on the hating capitalism side if that's really part of it? Because if we're talking about care for the poor, wouldn't we make the case that capitalism is the best way to care for the poor? But I mean, judging from a utilitarian perspective, in a way of just like numbers wise, I'm not disagreeing, I don't think, with anything that I heard them say, because I still believe in charity, and I believe that there will be people who are falling through the cracks who the church needs to help and catch and etc. And people who can't work and all that sort of stuff. So the issue that I want to discuss is we throw slogans back and forth, and we talk on these broad base, well, you know, social justice, capitalism. But, and it seems like we're divided. It seems like we disagree, but there's a good chance we don't even disagree on like 95% of the things. So, and just to go a little bit further, it could be different. This is my assumption, but the fluff and the jargon that I encountered in the exhortation, while yes, you can argue that he made a valid religious point throughout all of it, and that he should be doing that, I don't necessarily disagree. But when you use a bunch of what at least passes as political fluff and jargon, you're entering the political space on the side of the fluff and jargon who that appeals to. And like, can you claim to not do that intentionally? Can you claim that, well, I'm just sort of broad strokes gesturing in this direction? I don't know. Certainly I think we all do that. Like I wouldn't even call it an assessment. My take, not even hot take, hopefully, but my opposing side to what I perceived from gospel simplicity is just me saying, hey, look, I see a bunch of problems on the left, and I'm concerned about those, so I'm going to push right. And from what I see in gospel simplicity, he's like, I see a bunch of problems on the right, I'm going to push left. And that might make us seem like we disagree, but I don't think we disagree probably on almost anything. Well, that's not true, but like not on anything huge. I would agree with him on most points, I think, because I don't think he would say that there's no problems on their left. There's nothing we need to worry about putting up handrails on the left and drawing lines when we need to. And I wouldn't say that there's no problems on the right. And there's not something that we need to do to make sure that, I got dog potential issues here, fighting over toys. Hey, leave it. There's not something that we need to do to make sure that we don't fall into the pitfalls of the right. So this is my point, is we have to go deeper than the headlines. We have to go deeper than our preferred way of expressing things and see what we actually think, what we actually disagree on once we start talking about principles, once we start talking about implementation. And again, that sort of wraps back to the Pope. Like, the Pope has an exhortation, and it's great. I haven't read it. Maybe it's all great. It could very well be, and I could say so. Yet then it comes down to, well, I might agree with all that, but my idea of implementing that principle might be very different than someone else's, and a lot of that might be just based on misinformation or whatever else it is. So the issues just go a lot deeper than terms. The issues go a lot deeper than headlines, and that's my point. And a lot of our problems come about at the headlines level, and we have to be willing to go deeper and be like, well, yes, I had this reaction to this headline, but do I really disagree with the substance of the issue? And then what is the substance of the issue? So that's the question. I hope you like the videos coming up. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all my new subscribers. Give it all a like and a share. It really helps out. And God bless. Have a good fall and winter season as we change across the world.